Good afternoon and a warm welcome to the Young Money Debate. I'm Nozi Pombanjwa, and in this special broadcast we engage with South Africa's youth and understand the budget from their perspective. To kick us off though, CNBC Africa went out to see if the country's youth have any understanding of the budget. These were some of their responses.
It's about how we've utilized our money in different fields, professions, industries rather, So you would have finance, you would have housing, and what the money did and how much are they able to account for?
I think generally what South Africa needs to do and the rest of the African continent is to start focusing on using what we have best, and that is our natural resources. So I think we need to look into exploiting that more and seeing if that won't be, because I think at the moment there's a lot of using European means and ways to get to build South Africa. I think the best way to build South Africa and to get more revenue and more money for South Africa is to start looking at what are we good at and what do we have, and that's natural resources. Everyone knows that we have rich resources here in South Africa and Africa.
To be honest, I don't think they're managing it very well because they are always traveling to expensive places. If they could just cut down to those kind of situations and just try to find cheaper places where they could stay instead of using expensive places. And then also with them always building something, taking some things and bringing in new laws, bringing in new things in the country, that's also wasting just money. They could be saving that money instead of doing e-tolls and what.
Well, I don't know, man. I don't know.
Honestly, it doesn't affect me anyway. I don't want to lie. Like, they don't pay my school fees, they don't pay my rent as long, so I don't know.
I think it's really important that the money is channeled in a right way into the right and correct projects. So it is very important that the money actually arrives at the locations where it needs to be the most: education, healthcare and electricity. So these are the main points I think should be important and focused on in the speech.
I think the minister should actually be focusing on education, purely because we have a huge amount of skill shortages in South Africa.
Well, we've heard from some of South Africa's youth, but right now joining me in studio to share their insights on what the youth think of this year's budget is my two-member panel. Social media editor of Black Nation magazine is Lethabo Africa, and next to Lethabo is Jamie Might. He is the founder and leader of Project W. Guys, welcome. Thank you for making the time to join us. Lethabo, let me start off with you. Before we react to the budget speech from the minister, what did you think about your fellow youth members and some of the answers that they gave to those questions?
I thought it was interesting. It's honest, which I appreciate. The honesty is really, really good. But at the same time, it speaks of an issue that I have a serious problem with. It's like apathy, youth apathy. They're like, it doesn't concern me. But if you actually researched it, if you asked the questions, really important questions, then you'd realize it does actually concern you. I think that's really, really important.
And of course, we heard the young lady saying that they don't pay my school fees and they don't pay my rent, which technically isn't necessarily true. We've seen the budget allocation towards education, but we'll get into that a little bit more. Jamie, I want your impression on the fellow youth that we've heard from before we get to what the minister spoke about this week.
Well, it seemed like some of our colleagues weren't as well versed with the details of the budget as they ought to have been. At least to know that, vodka is going to cost you R3.77 more would have been at least something to know.
That's a lot of detail on your part, knowing that stat, eh?
Well, my neighbors mentioned it, so they care a lot about vodka. So they mentioned that everything's going to go up, especially the booze and the cigarettes, which is what they care about. So the response wasn't as thorough from civic society as we would have loved it to be, because the engagement necessary for
Yeah.
these kind of details to be accountable, you know, so that the minister doesn't feel like he can just budget anything. There needs to be a real civic engagement
Right.
with the budget so that people can be more on their toes about how exactly they spend the
You
taxpayers'
raise a very
money.
important point about accountability. And one more step before we get to the budget. Why should young people care?
Exactly, you mentioned it. It's about accountability. If you don't care, then they won't care. I mean, you can't expect change to happen. You can't expect our country to be where it's supposed to be if you're not going to be interested, if you're not going to care. Who's going to do it for you? Especially as young people. I mean, we've been told as born frees, we have the country in our hands, the future is like in our hands and all this, but like we need to realize this. We need to take into account for ourselves our own realities and our own truths and be honest with ourselves, and then we can hold our leaders accountable as well. I think that's
What
really
I'm hearing
important.
from you is you an underlying sentiment that with rights comes responsibility and young people should take that responsibility. Let's go to the budget. I know vodka stood out for you and that was an important takeaway on your part.
For my neighbors.
For your neighbors. But let's talk about your key highlights. What resonated with you? What did Minister say that you thought, oh, that's interesting?
You know what, when I looked at the broader picture of the budget, some things stood out immediately to me, and those things weren't really things that I was joyful about.
Yeah.
Firstly, the amount of money we spend on basic education is quite a lot compared with all other countries in Africa, but the returns on our investment are relatively low. We are getting 28% of the people who actually wrote matric being able to get into universities. We get 500,000 students who never even make it to matric. And what that makes me think is that for 204 billion, we are getting 14%. If you factor in the 500,000 who don't write it, we're getting a 14% return on that money. And that makes me worry that we're spending so much, getting so little. So that was something that alarmed me because that's a lot of money.
Jamie, I want us to go through your top three one by one, and maybe let's deal with this one before we come to Letabo's top three highlights. The return on investment in education. As is indicated, we're one of the highest spending countries if you compare us with our sub-Saharan African members. Why are we getting it wrong, Letabo? What should the government be doing? Because it clearly seems as if money is just not enough.
I mean, the money, I don't necessarily think the money is not enough. I mean, so much is being allocated, but it's how it's being implemented. I mean, last year, there was a certain amount of money that was allocated to delivering textbooks and workbooks. Now it's like, it's gone up again. But like, the textbooks don't arrive. It's like, because I honestly think it goes back to like accountability and the fact that we're just, it's like, yeah, it's fair. Okay, here we are, we talk about it here. We've allocated it, but then we don't actually go back and say, okay, we've allocated this much. We need to constantly go back to what we've promised, you know? Go back to the numbers, and also let people know as well, okay, this is how far we are. Step by step, like when it's like partnership, as I constantly think, it's important to collaborate and partner with our people so that it's not like us versus them. We allow them to do whatever. They tell us, okay, here's the money, and then what?
I'll get back to us versus them because that's a big statement that you make. I want to go back to textbooks with you. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we heard that in Gauteng, we're going paperless classrooms, we're going online. There was a rollout of iPads in terms of pilot schools. And then we heard the minister saying yesterday, very proudly at that each student is going to get two textbooks per subject. You know, as a young person, how do you react to that? Is this not a conflicting message that the government seems to be sending out?
It's really, really confusing. Like, you get textbooks, you get an iPad. It reminds me of like Oprah, you get one, you get one, you get one.
You also get one.
Hey! But it's like, okay, now what do I do with these textbooks? What do I do with this iPad?
Yeah.
Like, you can't just give it to me and then me have a good time. It has to be there has to be more.
I'm sure the audience is going to talk about teacher training and all the other issues that we have in education. Let's move on from education. So we've got one of Jamie's highlights. Let's come get your first highlight, and then we'll go back to Jamie's second highlight. What stood out for you outside of education?
What stood out for me specifically was like the small business enterprises that they are trying to develop us.
Yeah.
As they say. I mean, I was a student, and after school, like, of course, it's difficult to get into university.
Yeah.
That's the first hurdle. Once you get there, you graduate, and then what? There's so many of us sitting at home because, I mean, job hunting is a real experience. It's difficult. And then they say you don't have experience, you don't have this, you don't have the qualifications, or you don't have this and you don't have that. And then you sit back and you're like, okay, what do? I have to start something for myself. I have to become an entrepreneur.
What made you brave enough to decide that you were not going to get into the race of tabling your CV at the door of employers, and that you are going to be an employer in your own right?
I mean, my brothers, I call them my brothers, the Black Nation, we always say, like, we can't depend on someone else. Our parents have struggled too long for us to be dependent on someone else. It's time we start doing things for ourselves. We have the freedoms to do so. Yes, the money may not be there, but we can make it work. I mean, it's very difficult to be dependent on somebody else, especially it's very difficult to get into that kind of space.
Right.
So rather start your own, be your own boss. It sounds like corny, but like to be your own boss, to know your stuff,
I like
to
how you
learn
move your
as well.
shoulders when you be your own boss. It's
like
there's
kinda
a
like,
rap
you know,
tune
kind of
to it.
that kind of vibe.
I like that. But the point you're making here is that as a business owner, as a small micro entrepreneur, you were happy with what the minister said. We're seeing tax controls being relieved rather for small and medium-sized enterprises. Good news for you.
It is good news, but at the same time, it goes back to what you were saying, in that it's only good news because, well, our education system isn't all that great. So if I can't go to university, what am I going to do? I can't sit on my
So
bum
it's
the
the
whole
lesser
time.
evil of the
Exactly.
two. Jamie, let's come back. Highlight number 2.
Highlight number 2 was, for me, us making a realistic assessment of the goals of the NDP and our current growth path.
Yeah.
Because in order for us to achieve the NDP, the document says we need to have growth above 5%. Last year we had growth at 1.5%. This year the growth is projected to be 2%, which many analysts think is too positive.
Right. Down
So
from
if-
2.5.
Yeah, down from 2.5, which is also positive. So if we're actually going to be growing at 1.5 to 2, and the target is to get us at around about 3 by 2017, 13 years before we're supposed to have reached the NDP, we now need to start analyzing on a long-term effect of how far off track are we from realizing the modest aspirations of the NDP, and what are we going to do? And for me, the budget starts showing that we're not going to reach the NDP on time because we're not growing fast enough, and we also don't have real new measures of revenue coming through in the coming years which are going to get us to grow that fast.
You're absolutely right, and you touch on a very important point about real revenue streams that we need to start seeing. Now, somebody said to me yesterday in one of the panels that I was chairing, saying, you know, Nozipho, this is the first fiscal challenge that the ANC-led government has actually had. In the last 20 years, what we've seen is fiddling around the edges and, you know, moving tax here and moving this here. For the first time, we actually need to have real revenue streams. Do you get a sense that this budget reflects the first cracks, real cracks, for the ANC?
Well, I think it reflects the fact that we are running out of money. The deficit is growing, our credit status is going lower, not higher, which means that the cost of borrowing becomes higher because we have to pay more on interest. And we're currently paying a lot on interest as it is. So definitely the country has a challenge, and the country has been run by the ANC. The reality is the world is very competitive, and the way we're training our youth, we're not in a position right now to enter most of the most lucrative markets, except to try to fix the old markets which we're in, which is farming and tourism and all of those old school things. But there's a limit to what you can get.
You're going to offend some people in the audience talking about old school things, but let's move on from there. And so your point is noted, and I think it's a very poignant point that you make. Your second highlight, Lethabo.
It's not necessarily a highlight, but it goes back to the fact that we're kind of like living beyond our means. I won't specifically go into in-depth detail as to what my highlight was, because I'm a bit of a cynic and I won't point out, I don't want to sound like a critic.
Cynics.
But I think it goes back to the feeling of like, now what?
But let's bring it back to reality. So you're saying that as a country we're living beyond our means. Bring it down to the young person who on Facebook, on Twitter, is posting a picture of the latest palladiums, and I think those retail at what, 3,000 rand a pop or whatever the price may be. Surely it starts with you. It starts with young people not also wanting to live lives that are within the means of their very own household.
Definitely. I mean, it's the whole credit thing. I think it's like you living beyond your means because you want to swank or you want to do this and you want to do that, but you don't realize.
Is that a new word? You want to swank?
No, it's a very old word.
Oh, okay.
Like, it's a very old word.
I'm exposing myself now.
It's a very like 50s old, like 1950s old.
Wow.
Like, it's like you're constantly living beyond your means. I think one of the people said, like, our government is constantly spending on things that they shouldn't be doing. They're spending on, but I think it goes back to what we spend our money on.
Right.
Palladiums are 3 grand. Why? Why are we spending 3 grand when you say you've got rent to pay, you say you need to pay your school fees, you've got textbooks to pay for, and all these other things, but you're rocking palladiums?
A very quick one. When I was in university, and it wasn't that long ago, now that she's talking about the 1950s and all of that, there were banks, and I'll name this bank. I think it was Absa Bank who came onto campus and began to offer bank cards, which was great because you thought, you know, they're getting young people to become participants in the financial markets, and you have a bank card. Today, my younger sister talks to me about credit cards being offered on campus. How is this a reality? Can you guys reinforce this? Can you say, yes, this is a fact, this is actually happening on campus, that we are being offered credit cards to afford the lifestyle of palladiums?
Well, you're not going to afford the lifestyle of palladiums on the one they give to students. They are offering them, but to be fair to the banks, there's quite a lot of rigid criteria before they actually give a student a credit card. So they are there, but you don't just get one. And even if you do get one, the amount of expenditure you can actually have on that card is limited. But I do guess it's a way of them trying to introduce you to that lifestyle of living in debt. But the impact is really limited because you don't get much kick out of that card.
Final highlight coming from you.
The final highlight coming from me from this whole thing is there's an elephant in the room. You know, it's trying to raise the 17 billion, but there's so much wastage of expenditure currently in government. Corruption, the tenders that don't get delivered, or the tenders that get delivered and then have to be re-delivered because the bridge dissolved or the house broke down or whatever. So that's...
Or the fire pool.
Or the fire pool if you want to go there. But the point is, that's 30 billion by some estimates, which is missing from our coffers on an annual basis. And we had no real direction as to what is the Treasury going to do, what's the minister going to do to reduce those losses of income, because that's taxpayers' money.
So one of the things that I think I picked up, and I'm playing devil's advocate, and I want you to respond to this, is that they say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to centralize the tender system. We're going to, instead of having...
And then the whole ANC got happy, right? Like everybody was
because there's going to be one guy who's going to be standing and saying, you get one, you get one, and you get one, right? How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think taking, let's say there's 10 offices now, however many they are, making it one office doesn't take away the principal cause of corruption, which is that we've got greedy politicians, we've got greedy individuals who no longer care as much about the people as they ought to, and are trying to max out and loot the state in essence. So whether there's one office or 10, it doesn't seem to me that the looting will be reduced just because you took it and put it in Gauteng or in Cape Town. So I really don't think that's a solution to the corruption problem. I think actually real punitive measures around the people who have been corrupt, real investigations, seeing some of these people go to jail, because some of the corruption is blatant. People are driving Maseratis in Johannesburg and all they do is work for the ANC.
Right.
And then you wonder, the ANC does not pay you Maserati salary. How on earth is it that you're outside Labori with the Maserati talking to young girls? Right?
Is Labori like a fancy restaurant?
It's a residence where young students live.
Oh, I see.
And we've seen some ANC bigwigs outside these residences offering girls all sorts of great promises. And then the question is, where are they getting the money to live that kind of a lifestyle? They're obviously getting it from the state, which means that the state is leaking money. And what we need to make sure is that we have measures in place to make sure we don't keep losing 30 billion a year to corruption.
Corruption, a big concern. Before I get your third highlight, what do you feel about this leaking budget? Our taxes go up, personal income tax up, yes, only 1%. But at the end of the day, there are people who've got hands at the bottom of this leaking budget bucket, and they're taking this through corrupt means. How do you feel about that?
It goes back to what you were saying, in that, like, I really don't want to call them greedy. I think they're unaccountable. They come up with it like a solution of sorts, but they don't tell us how is this going to solve the problem. You can't centralize this whole tender thing. You can't centralize it. How is that going to solve it? I mean, you spoke of like the elephant in the room. Is like, you have to look at it, you have to see it, you have to point it out and be like, there's an elephant in the room, and then say, okay, how do we solve this? Don't just say, okay, we cover it up, but how is this going to move the elephant out the room, you know? I think it's very important that we become honest. I think it's about honesty.
You almost sound like you're going the moral route. So we almost as a country need to refine our moral compass and values. Is that what I'm hearing?
Definitely. I mean, it speaks like what I was saying, my last highlight, I'll just jump to it quickly. It's like, there's just feeling. There's a feeling. I was thinking maybe it's because Sona was, that mess. Maybe we're still feeling that sort of way. But there's this feeling of like anxiety, stress, and that leads to apathy. If we don't come up with solutions for this anxiety and this stress and this hopelessness and this almost panic, because we're not being honest, I think we're not being honest, we're all like, we'll lie about this, we'll lie about that, but like, if you're honest, you see the elephant, you say there's an elephant there, let's come up with solutions to make sure that, okay, there's not a big problem in the future. I mean, we're panicking, the country's like in dire and desperate need of like some serious accountability.
What's your sense? In the last 20 years, do you think we've improved the lot of South Africans, or have we gone backwards?
I mean, I'm 21, turning 22, so
in your whole lifetime, that's you only know this post-democracy era, right?
Like, I feel like the older I get, the more cynical I become. The more cynical I become, the more tired I become, the more angry I am. Like, you're angry, but like, what can you do? You're like, and I think the youth can share my sentiments in that either you care or you don't. And a lot of us don't care, but that's how we end up with a country that is just dismal.
Do you care, Jamie?
I absolutely care, but I just want to differ a little bit. I think the people of South Africa are honest. I think we're really all genuinely honest. Everybody knows stealing is bad. It looks like our leaders forgot the message, that the stealing is bad, the greed is bad. Everybody knows we ought to share, except it seems for the people who are in charge of making sure that they share the resources of the state.
How do we get over the "it's my turn" syndrome?
It's a tricky question, but I think what we ought to do is to honestly look at the leaders we've selected and remove some of them, right? We are leaving it for too long in the hands of the people. I think we have almost like a pastor syndrome. We're waiting for the pastor to come in and call out the bad people, and then they'll repent or something like that, instead of taking it into our own hands and fixing it.
It certainly sounds like heads must, should, and will roll. The youth have spoken. We're taking a short ad break, but more insights from our young experts in a moment. Welcome back to the Young Money Debate. In this special broadcast, we're engaging with South Africa's youth about the budget, and we're getting a sense of how it affects them. But before we get some of the views from the floor, here's a quick reminder. You can definitely keep part of this conversation following me at The Real Nosy, or following my guest. Jamie is at The Next Barack, as in Barack Obama, and Letabo's Twitter handle is Call Me Africa, Africa spelled with a K. Let's go to our audience and get our first question. Please introduce yourself, the university you're from, what you're studying, and what your question or comment is.
My name's Tanya. I'm studying a BA degree in Law and International Relations, and I'm from Wits University. My comment is on Jamie's point of education. Yes, it's all good and well that we're spending so much money in developing primary school education and high school even, but our tertiary education, it sounds very glamorous in the speech that we're raising it annually by 7.1%, but initially it's only growing by, I think this current expenditure is 6.2 billion, and now it's raising to 6.9 billion in 2017. Is that truly enough to create the skills needed?
I'm seeing your friend right next door to you. She's shaking her head and she might just have the answer. So let's get you coming in and giving us a sense of what's your take on the increase we've seen for higher education spending. The minister also made mention of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. They're going to be getting more money, but is it enough? Please do stand up and yes, please, and then tell us who you are and then maybe respond to those issues that have been raised.
Okay, my name is Simlindile. I am studying a BA degree majoring in political studies and media studies at Wits University. I feel, I share my sentiments with Tanya that it's not enough. I mean, if expenditures at 6.2 billion now and at 6.9 2 years on from now, but yet you still have NASFA saying that they do not have enough money, I feel like it's not doing anything, it's not enough. Yes, universities do get subsidized. Yes, the fees get subsidized, but the nature of it is that it's very expensive. I mean, you find students, even though with the university fees subsidized, they're still paying over 40,000 Rand for a degree. So that's just the tuition, without counting the cost of living, without counting textbooks, without counting where actually they live. So I mean, as a student myself, it is something that is very close to me because, and as well, so I'll bring in the middle class, where in South Africa, to get NSFAS funding, it's very hard because they say you have to live within a certain bracket, but then people are not then put in situations where they're not rich enough to afford university, but yet they're not poor enough to be funded for it. So what should we do?
So there are problems with NSFAS. There's clearly insufficient funding going to higher education, but Project W, that's one of the issues you're also looking at, the high dropout rates, the financial support that students should be getting in higher education. How do you respond to some of these concerns?
Well, let's just correct the numbers, right? So it's about 11 billion, which is projected for 2017. But if you do the maths, and I think this has been in the news sufficiently for the maths to be commonly known, at WITS, for example, we had 2,788 students who didn't get admitted to WITS because they didn't have money, but they had the marks. So they had the marks but no money. You multiply that by 23, which are the universities, that's already way over 2 billion. You add in the FETs and the other institutions, that's also over another 2 billion. So if you're just increasing it incrementally by that 7.1%, that's nowhere near enough to cover all the costs for the people who get the marks but can't actually get into university because they can't afford it. And also the means test, they use a means test to determine how poor you are. It's also a relatively harsh test. So if you're on this side of the line, no matter how close you are to being poor enough, they just draw a red line, you don't get funded. So you're still poor, you still can't afford to go to university, and there's nowhere near enough funding given. And the stats are in the OECD that we are funding at less than 1% of our GDP, and most other countries are funding at least 2% of their GDP for higher education and training. So we're not headed the right direction for the amount of money we're spending on higher education.
Minister Blades Zamande, if you're watching this show, this is for you. The youth has spoken. The financial model of NSFAS is not working. Let's get to our next question. There's a question right in the front, and then we'll take the gentleman in the end. Please stand, introduce yourself, and fire away.
All right, hi, my name's Entle Kumalo. I'm from Wits University, and I'm in my final year of politics and IR, and I'm representing the SRC. I just wanted to speak on the theme of hopelessness, which I think is quite important for the youth, and since this is a youth program, I want to touch on that. And hopelessness, in a large extent, is breeding ground for apathy. And so if we have youth, for example, who are apathetic, there's no sense of accountability from citizens to government. Because as it stands, we have what I like to trickle-down effect, where we have youth listening and ministers always speaking. And so where does our agency come in? Where are we allowed to express our sentiments as to what, where the budget should be allocated, how it's allocated, because it affects us essentially, especially with matters such as education. I mean, we had the NSFAS crisis just recently at Wits University, where we had to have a sense of agency, where we didn't necessarily work with the government, because where do we fit in with the cyclic plot of money and finance in this country?
Thank you so much for that question, and I'm hoping somebody from the audience can also talk about what happened to the National Youth Development Agency and all these other platforms that are supposed to be the mouthpieces for young people. But let's get the question at the end. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you,
Perhaps
Nozi.
the youngest in the group.
Yeah, Eric Stillerman, London School of Business, South Africa. I'm the principal. I brought along some of my students to compete with Wits here. And I think it's a challenge really to the youth to participate in this debate. And Nozi, congratulations on setting up this forum for the youth to have young money and to express themselves. My question is, and I'll give a suggestion as well to you people as the youth, is what are you going to do about it? How are you going to increase accountability, delivery, return on investment, good decision making, and turn this country around, rather than being apathetic and hopeless? Let's turn the whole situation around. How are we going to activate a better future for you guys in this country from today onwards? You've got a platform here on TV all over Africa, CNBC Africa, ABN, Africa Business Network. You're being heard. My suggestions to you to take up the challenge, I think you need to become activists. I think you cannot rest assured that there's a democracy and everything's hunky-dory. It's not hunky-dory. We've heard that very, very clearly in so many ways. Corruption, leakage, poor delivery, poor return on investment. So you need to stand up. You need to be active.
Right.
You need to be positive. And one more suggestion, Nozi, and I think the key to that is, and this is what education is all about, and as students, that you need to educate yourselves, because you need to know what you're talking about. You need to look at that budget and say, do you know how much that budget is? Do you know, anyone here, how much the total budget is? 1.4 trillion rand. Let nobody say there's not enough money. Thank you, Nozi.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Is there a hand? There's a hand. Let's take the hand directly behind you, and then we'll take the gentleman on my far right. So yes, please, sir. You go ahead, and we'll take the next. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Prince Irahon from London School of Business in South Africa here. I actually first want to thank my principal and also comment. How do we actually correct this in the future? It's one of the ways we need to correct our values. You understand? We need to correct our values. And as well, you and I, we all have mentors. Now you need to see what you want to be in your mentor. You understand? If you say, oh, the government is not doing well, who in the government do you think is not doing well? Is that your mentor? And if you actually grow, you're actually going to be so. You understand? And so we're going to correct that. And
thank you for that comment. I'm going to move on because we're running out of time, because I do want you guys to fire some ministers hypothetically while we're here. All the other underperforming ministers. Let's get, you can pass on the microphone and let's get another comment, but thank you so much for that comment. Yes, please, sir.
My name is Lisanias Mpambire. I'm from London School of Business in South Africa. I'm a lecturer. I'm studying a master's in science in financial economics. So what I've seen from the budget, my worry is the trillions of dollars. The risk is to running into national debt of government borrowing, which I'm seeing with the trends. Because all these activities that have been financing from all I've been discussing, they are not really giving a return on investments. So we need actually to find actually a department which we thought is a cost center, like entrepreneurship, that we can actually have partnership with government that can bring up a return on investment on our spending, that will also enable to promote jobs or employment in this country. And we can measure a high rate of return on investment that we want to look at.
Thank you so much for that comment. Again, I play devil's advocate. We have a Department of Economic Development. We have a National Planning Commission. We have a Ministry of Finance. These institutions are there. The question is, why are they not working? Let's move on. I think there's another question. Yes, please, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kumbozo Tuswa. I am a copywriter and a volunteer at the Voice of Its radio station. So my question is on the backdrop of hearing news that the public protector received an allocation of about 4 million rand.
Yeah.
But now what I'm thinking is, do we not think that there's so much money being thrown around, but it's not being allocated to all the right places? The public protector's office is supposed to tackle high-level crime. Do we honestly think that 4 million rand is enough to actually tackle the amount of high-level crime that there is in this country? So,
just a quick question back to you. If you were Minister Nene, where would you allocate the money? Your top 3 priorities, the things that you think should get the biggest chunk of money.
First of all, it will just be about making sure that the decision makers who are making all these decisions about how the country is run, what systems are running, make sure that we provide them enough, we provide those departments enough funding to hire the right candidates for those positions. And then after that, making sure that we put in accountability systems that work. And also make sure that when accountability is being kind of trampled on, we make sure that there's actual measures that are done and that are effective enough to work.
Okay, I've noted that, and I'll get my panelists to respond to a lot of the issues being raised. The gentleman in front of you has a question. Yes, another very young spring chicken joining us today.
Thank you very much. My name is Ivan. I'm coming from Romele Publications. And thanks God that age is only a number. It's all about up here. Now, it's actually really looking at the budget. Isn't it actually a little bit too pedestrian? Is it actually radical? Because are we actually just fiddling with a few couple of numbers here and there instead of actually doing something? Because if we're really looking at it, have we actually realized that we are not doing well? Are we actually at the stage where we're looking at European Union and European countries and realizing austerity and Greece is up in flames and all kind of things? But it seems that we are not actually taking it serious. Should we actually do something vastly different? And what should we then be doing?
Thank you very much for that. And that's a very big question. So I see your hands. The 3 questions are in the front. Let's start off with the lady in the middle. Let's get the microphone to her. I'll take those last 3 and then I'll get my panelists to respond.
Hi, my name is Tabuho Khanyaho. I'm a final year BSc Accounting Science student at UNISA. And I just have a comment. I see that Eskom has not been brought up, and I think that is a big issue. The government has just bailed Eskom with about 23 billion rand. And I'm just asking myself, are we not making a culture of the government is going to keep on bailing state-owned companies? When is that going to come to an end? When are we going to be privatizing these institutions? This money could have been used in terms of education. They said that the NYDA or some of the systems need some money. Why is the money not going there?
Good question, great question. Right next to you? Yes, please, go ahead.
Hello, I am Claudia, and I am from Boston Media House. I'm a 3rd-year student doing journalism. I am from just around the corner, and I'm just from around the corner as well in Alexandra.
Yes.
One of the poorest places in South Africa. And my question is, it is a question. What is happening? Is that 1.4 trillion rand going to reach the people of Alexandra? 9 people in a square meter. Is a raindrop of that 1.4 billion US dollars going to reach even one person in that amount of people?
Fantastic question. Let's take the last one as we wrap up our on-the-floor conversation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Vubrai. I'm with the London School of Business doing 2nd year, specializing in management and information systems. My question to us as the youth is, we're asking for these funds, and we have this ideal knowledge of us trying to improve the economy of today, the political scenario of today, and to what extent do we have the credibility, the resources for us to be able to stand out and be able to create an economy that is far much better, that is not politically affiliated by so much corruption of the day.
Again, corruption comes up. Thank you so much. That's a lot of issues that have been raised, from debt to state-owned enterprises, in particular ESCOM, to advocacy, values, fiddling around the edges versus doing something substantial and something bold. Which one do you want to take on, Letabo?
I'll try to take on two at the same time. You spoke of youth advocacy and this feeling of hopelessness, and how do we avoid it? I think in order to avoid it is to ask questions, constantly ask questions. I mean, the people said that like this doesn't relate to them. Ask why. Ask where are the connections. Ask questions, constantly ask questions, because I think when you ask questions, our leaders will be forced to answer these questions. I think so. If you constantly ask, we'll be forced to answer these questions. And then it goes back to like, I'll just touch on this point of like being radical. I mean, we realize now we're in big trouble. And now, yes, we're trying to figure out by fiddling here, fiddling there, we're trying to figure out how do we not like drop the ball? How do we make sure that it doesn't go completely haywire? We're not like another Greece. But like, I'm not necessarily sure. I don't have the answers for this. But I honestly believe that yes, we do need some radical change. Right. But the radical change can only come once we've answered the questions, once we're honest and we see the problem rather than like
so
turning a
actively
blind
engaging
eye.
as a citizen and asking questions to hold people to accountability and
getting
to
the
get
answers,
and getting the answers. Jamie, lots of issues raised. What irritates you in terms of the issues raised that you feel I have to deal with this issue?
Well, the African scenario is irritating, but I think I wanna comment on what perhaps the youth can do, because that was a question that was asked a lot of times. I think making a commotion is very important. We have to make noise about the wastage, about the corruption, and we don't nearly do any of that. I mean, we've left that as civic society to the political parties, but we haven't expressed our extreme displeasure with the wastage of our money. But more than that, I think what the youth needs to do is to take themselves seriously. This is not a party. This is not a big turn up. We're not just waiting for the weekend every time. What we actually need to do is start participating in civic society. That's what the youth did in '76. That's what Mandela did when he was a youth and they formed the ANC Youth League. The idea that you don't take part in society is one which is actually leading us to have our future being hijacked by the people who are stealing from us now, because it's our future that they're stealing. When we have to deal with this deficit, it's us who are going to have to face the problems of a junk status country. We're going to have to pay those prices. So we need to start actually taking part. And when I say taking part, is at your own level. At my university, some students just do not put in any effort. After all the sacrifices, the people who do have NSFAS, some of them don't take the degree seriously. 50% is an acceptable mark. Do you know what I mean? And that's not acceptable. And you have to start taking yourself seriously before you can start asking other people to take you seriously. Because if you can't even compete in the economy as an individual, how are you going to be able to make the president make your country compete in the economy? So I think one of the things we have to do is self-introspect as the youth and ask, are we really holding ourselves up to a standard of excellence? Are we delivering in our own personal lives the things we want others to deliver to us? Because if we're not, we won't be in the level of integrity to demand that from others. I
want to bring in another stakeholder that I think we've been fairly silent about in our conversations today, the role of business. And I want to bring it to you, Letabo, where you've said that the lesser evil of the two when you can't get employed is to go the entrepreneurial route and start your own thing. Do you think business is doing enough and playing their role in trying to move the economy forward and to try and get young people to get the skills to become economically active, as Jamie says?
I don't think so, unless it benefits them. It's like that vibe of like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I believe that they're not really all that interested unless it serves them. Yes, a great economy will serve all of us, but businesses are about the now, right now. How's this going to help me? If it's not going to help me right now, I'm not interested. Move along, move along, move along. Especially with young people, it's like we all constantly get this move along, move along, move along. And when the way we move along is to start our own businesses, start our own like blogs, whatever, something to keep us busy, something to keep us engaged and alive. I think it's really important.
So one of the key issues we've been talking about today is accountability, and when we were engaging with our studio audience a little bit earlier, they raised a concern about the performance of our political leadership. I did make a promise, and that promise was they could hypothetically fire some of the ministers that we currently have in cabinet. I want to go back to the audience and get a quick thumbs up or thumbs down for the finance minister, and maybe just get 2 or 3 of them just to tell me if there are heads that should roll, which heads should they be? Firstly, let's start off. Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene, budget speech this week. Are we giving it a thumbs up or are we giving it a thumbs down? Show of hands. I hope we've got that on camera. That is a firm thumbs down coming through for Minister Nhlanhla Nene. I'm going to go out on a limb and just pose another question. Our president, the chief responsible for the direction of this country, are we giving President Jacob Zuma a thumbs up or a thumbs down? So that's, camera, I hope you're getting that. That is 2 thumbs down from the youth. And let's get one brave soul quickly standing up and giving us a sense of the 3 ministers that must go. Please stand up very quickly. There's a microphone behind you. Please. There we go. Stand up.
Blaise Mzimande, the
So Minister of Higher Education, heads must roll. He's out. One more minister. Yes, please.
Definitely Angie Motshekga.
Angie Motshekga, basic education, certainly she's out. And are we keeping the rest of the cabinet? No. Who else are we taking out? Let us know.
Well, he's not a minister, I mean the president himself.
The president himself. So there you have it, South Africa. But let's get your final closing comments before we wrap up the show. You guys have fired the president. You fired the Minister of Higher Education, and you fired the Minister of Basic Education. Jamie, is that reflective of what young people think of today's leadership?
Well, it's definitely reflective of what this room thinks. I mean, it's a divided opinion on the streets, but I personally, I concur with this voice, because I genuinely think that our commander-in-chief is not taking us in the right direction. If this was a soccer team, he would have been fired a long time ago. The difference is with the country, it's hard to tell when you're losing and how badly you're losing, because sometimes some of our people haven't seen what the rest of the world is doing and how far advanced they are. But definitely those 3 ministers, I mean President Zuma and the 2 ministers, those 2 I concur with absolutely. This country isn't heading in the right direction, and I wish the youth could take themselves more seriously. Then we could begin to steer ourselves back onto the right course.
I've got less than a minute. This country is not headed in the right direction. The youth need to take themselves more seriously. Dual responsibilities coming through from Jamie. Your parting comments.
Definitely, I think it's a 2-way street. It starts with us, great, starts with us, but it also goes back to our leaders. It has to be not us versus them again. You're not talking at us, you're talking to us, we're talking with us in order to move forward, because I mean, we share our country. It's not yours, it's not mine, it's ours. And I think it's really important to take care of it, take ourselves seriously, take our country seriously. Yeah.
South Africa, there you have it. Stop talking at us and begin talking to us. That's the view from the youth of South Africa on the back of the budget for 2015. A very big thank you to my guest, Lethabo Africa. She's the editor of Black Nation magazine, Jamie Mighty rather. He is the founder and leader of Project W. A very big thank you to my studio audience who were absolutely phenomenal. And that's it for the special look at the 2015 budget from the perspective of the youth. After the break, you can catch US Squawk Box. You guys are fantastic.